Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Spotlight on Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Scott Jones. The guy next to me, Joel, you and I have been working together for...
Been a couple of years
now. This is Joel Brier, and I guess the first way to introduce you is that you've spent the majority of your life in service as a first responder. Is that correct?
I did. I spent almost 30 years as a line firefighter, and also a union representative, and several years as an actual mental health consultant for our population, our firefighters. And currently I am a certified addiction professional in the state of Florida.
Really? Now, is there a personal reason you took that turn towards helping people with addiction, or did something lead you in that way?
It left me in that way.
Just so people will understand,
I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and,
everybody, you're going to be one of those guys going to blame the 60s, aren't you?
No, I'm not going to blame it. I just never really stopped completely. And later on, as I got older, I suffered some injuries. And got caught up in pain management and became very, very addicted to prescription drugs. And during that time, I was helping people get off of them. And so it was time to help myself.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, and I continued on, getting certified as an addiction counselor and international certified alcohol and drug counselor, and I've got several other credentials, including an interventionist from the center. And I continue to assist firefighters, mostly in the state of Florida, as a service representative. I actually work for the International Association of Firefighters in Washington, D.C., in the 12th District here in Florida.
That's fantastic. One of the things we want to talk about with everybody today, Joel, is that we've come together and taken and built a course that's kind of a two-part course specifically for firefighters, and it includes the basic interventionist course, which shows you it talks about communication and how to work with people and everything. We'll get more into it, and then Joel puts in the part where this is how it applies and this is why it's needed and all of those stuff within a fire department. Because the fire department's kind of let's go right into it. It's a culture of its own, is it not?
It is a culture of its own. I guess you'd call it a subculture of all first responders. We have the military, we have police, we have EMS, we have fire, we have combinations of EMS and fire. And so a fire and rescue department is kind of a subculture of the big title of first responder.
Right, and part of that culture is every time they're called to action, it's a possible danger situation. It's a possible stressor. It could be a chance for trauma. I mean, there's not many other things you do in your life where when the bell rings and you got to go to work, something bad is usually happening, right?
Well, it's somebody's emergency.
Yes.
Somebody's got an emergency that's urgent enough to, dial 911, and if it gets out to a station and a unit, that means that our dispatchers, our communicators at the communication center, who are highly trained, they're certified as well, have determined that there is a possibility of a situation that might be threatening.
Now, I'm sure it's different now than it was in the past, and maybe you could speak about that, because we're a lot more cognizant now of the effect it's having on people, the firefighters themselves, of dealing with these traumas and these emergencies every day. But years ago, we weren't cognizant of that at all, were we?
Well, I wouldn't say we weren't cognizant, but we were much more gung-ho about getting out there and doing the work and being that guy or girl that signed up for this occupation. But over the years, since there were professional firefighters, you got to remember there were no professional firefighters until really, at least here in Florida, the 70s, is when it really became paid professional firefighters. It was a career path. Before that, it was volunteer, and there were issues there as well.
I imagine back then the training wasn't as in depth and everything else then too, right?
Nothing was as in depth. We didn't have the materials that we use today. Look, it's 2021, and we're living a year into a pandemic of great proportions that most people, including my generation, and I'm in my later 60s, have ever witnessed anything like this. So you put that on top of all the other things that we do, and we're also human, just like everybody else. Sometime in our life, we're going to dial that 911 number.
Yes,
there's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. I'd be hard to find somebody who hasn't had to do that. If you're past your teenage years, at one point you've come in contact with a first responder for some reason, and that's really good. Now, one of the things you mentioned about yourself was you were in pain and you started some medications that kind of took you in a bad direction. It sounds to me like that would be something, especially with firefighters who have such physicality in what they're doing. There's probably a lot of injuries and a lot of opportunities for painkillers and pain relievers to become a problem. Is that true?
Sure, there is. There's reason for all kinds of addictions in what we do.
Sure.
Alcoholism is there. I've worked on members, clients, whatever you'd like to call them, with many different types of addiction problems. Including alcoholism, sex addiction, gambling. You just don't know what you're going to get. And more importantly, you don't know what caused it. We come from culturally different backgrounds, and we're thrown together and expected to be, and we successfully are, a cohesive unit that carries out a task.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that, Joe, who you work with, or Carol that you work with, didn't come from a place that, got her involved in some kind, or him involved in some kind of trauma that affected their life, which gave them the reason to want to be a first responder. We don't know any of those things.
Right.
So we have comorbid or co-occurring disorders.
Yeah.
That also apply to our population because we're as human as everybody else. And then you add our occupation on top of that, post-traumatic stress disorder from cumulative or even a significant event of trauma that you've witnessed on the job, domestic trauma because we're away from our families 1/3 of our lives. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of things. So it's the average Joe civilian citizen plus all the things that we do.
Understanding that trauma is important, I think, because we're getting a better understanding, I think, as a public now than we did before. But I think there's still that school of thought that, and forgive me for, I don't want to be graphic, but some people still believe PTSD and trauma is about, like, you see somebody blow up in front of you, and that's trauma. Well, of course it is. But it could be a cumulative thing of over the years of small things that build. Isn't that correct?
So, yes, first of all, that's correct. But I have done work with military providers, military peers, military counselors. We've done radio, we've done podcasts, we've done informational presentations on the differences. And I've become somewhat familiar with who, how, and why. And a lifer in the Marine Corps, who is actually a local counselor that I work with up in Palm Beach County, explained it this way. I'm out in the field and I'm given a task, and that task is X, Y, and Z, whether it's take over this, get rid of that, search this town for this person or that person. We go. We encounter some kind of physicality, some kind of trauma, in combat. Somebody gets hurt, somebody gets killed, whether it's, our buddy, somebody that we were sent out there with, thrown together with, because we come from different places and so do they, or it's the enemy. You're still seeing it. It's a human life. But when that event is over, they go back to the camp for a while.
Right.
It's not like cumulative it is, in that you get to witness the events, but you have much more time to process what happened,
Right.
before you get to the point where you're going out to do that again. For firefighters and most first responders, it's go to the event, go back to the station, go to the event, go back to the station, go to the event, go back to the station.
And sometimes there's very little break in between. I mean,
There are places,
you can barely get your boots off and you're heading back out again, right?
well, sometimes you don't get back.
You don't even get back,
You go
right.
from call to call to call, depending on what your population is. I worked in a zone that, it had, appropriate or not, it had 5-6 strip clubs. It had, several senior facilities, a Century Village, which has an elderly population. And you're talking about, 15 or 20,000 seniors in one spot. Mobile home parks everywhere. Low-lying areas that flood.
So this is a recipe for constant
It is.
activity as far as the fire department is
Correct.
concerned.
Correct.
Yeah. So what kind of damage or how dangerous is that to have to go from one to the next and never sit back and process anything that you've just done? Is that dangerous? Or could it be harmful, I guess?
Well, obviously that, the more events you witness, the more your brain has to process what's there. It is that, should I call it, trans-crisis period, from the time you saw things
Yeah.
till the time your brain stores it, hopefully appropriately. You may not have that time. You may it may be the end of the shift. But there are things that you can do we're only learning these in the last few years to process some of that stuff, including sitting down at the dinner table and having a conversation about it, making sure that our coworkers are okay if we've seen something significant. A lot of these calls are routine.
Right.
And so they're stored and they kind of all run together. Whether it's a senior that having chest pain or somebody that you got to pick up off the floor in their condo and put back in bed. All those calls are kind of routine. It's the calls that really stand out. That might affect you later if you don't process. We're very good at compartmentalizing stuff. And so learning some kind of mindfulness activity is always a good thing. But sometimes you don't get that chance, and sometimes your brain doesn't work that way. And so you start to, I'll compare it with RAM. Remember the old random access memory?
Yeah.
And what happens when your computer got full?
Right.
And so it quit working properly. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to lose some of that RAM, some of that memory to get new stuff in there. Well, it's kind of, sort of that way.
Right.
Because when you get too much of that, your brain starts to act up. And stuff can come to the surface, and it affects people in many, many different ways, just depending on who and how you are. What are you doing at home? What kind of, do you just go from day to day just running calls? I mean, are you taking a break?
Right.
So, and we don't know that. All we can do is make sure when we're at work, that's your firefighter family, and that we kind of watch out for each other, and that's kind of how the peer associations came together, and that was the catalyst that got it going. We found that talking to each other about things was a very beneficial type of self-therapy.
So Joel, this is interesting about, that this trauma builds up, or these moments build up, or these events build up. I know that there's always been that traditional, hey, and I know the police do it, and I know the firefighters do it, and I'm sure military. Let's hit the bar after our shift, and that's where our decompression happens.
Yeah.
But that also creates that connection between to relax. I need to get a belt in me. I need to get this. I need to get that. But that's been. The therapy has been hit the bar after your shift. Has that gone on for a while?
It's a pretty good part of it.
Yeah.
There are other diversions just depending on where you come from. Generationally, there's been some changes, but they're really, it's about taking yourself out of that mindset, bringing you to a place where you can relax and not have to think about those problems.
Right.
And, what you're saying is right. I try to be a little more gentle about it, but the bottom line is that you go home and take a cocktail or whatever your substance of choice you might decide it be, and it quickly takes you away from that place. There's a couple of things that's going on. Number one, it's instant relief. Number two is if one is good, five is better, and it's legal, and I can go on and on. Now, I'm not saying that the drugs are legal or illegal. There are some controlled substances we
Sure.
found in the workplace, so we pay attention to all of the different things that you might find there.
Now, this is not an indictment on first responders at all, because this is actually a cultural standard for everyone. You need to relax. You have a cocktail after you get home from work. You can't sleep. You take a prescription medication instead of or non-prescription, but you take a pill so you can sleep. You can't wake up. You take something to wake you up. This is a standard we have, but we're talking about a population, when we're talking about especially firefighters and people in the fire service. We're talking about people that the risk is extremely high for them because of the job they do, that if they start to have addiction problems, it needs to be dealt with. I mean, it's not just they have a problem and they're not going to affect anybody else. A lot can go wrong, can't it?
Well, absolutely. And I just want to take you back and show you a little bit, because culturally, as a culture through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and now, what we are seeing and witnessing at home is, let's take a look at the traditional police show. Hill Street Blues.
Yeah,
They're
that's a
either
classic.
working or they're in the bar.
Yeah.
Or they're in bed somewhere together. That's what you saw. In the 90s, same thing. In the 2000s, it got more intense, but they started to expose more of this might be a problem.
Yeah.
And in 2010, it really changed, because now we have people that are on TV at work and they are trailed off, addicted to some kind of substance or alcohol.
Right.
And so I guess in the end, that's probably a good thing, because it's showing the normality of a human being.
Yeah.
And yes, we do these things, and we're sworn to help people or uphold the law and all those things, but that doesn't make us inhuman. And so exposure to those things can come pretty easily. Even the police officer who grew up with somebody and he's still friends, and that guy is doing whatever. He's smoking a little weed. Mm-hmm. And the friend says, hey, why don't you give this a shot, or we'll take you away from work for a little bit. These are the different ways that we find this. We get it through, well, we've talked about this before, biological, psychological, and social.
Sure.
So what do we have in our family in the biological mix? Who's got the disease? Do we have anybody? I don't think today I know anybody that's not affected by addiction or alcoholism somewhere in the family.
Yes.
Or a very close friend. But biologically, if it's in the family, you can bet it's almost bet that it's going to be passed down or reappear somewhere.
Yeah.
Psychologically, if you're witnessing this trauma, and a cocktail takes you away from it when you get home, And I've seen this in a lot of guys that, I've wound up having to work with, and I'm sure you too. They wait till the evening, and the evening's when they get the relief.
Yes.
But evening becomes morning, and they come home from work after a bad shift, and it's like, well, hell, I felt pretty good last time I was able to have a cocktail at night. I didn't sleep last night. I have one now, or 3 or 4.
Right.
And maybe the family's out working or at school, and by the time they get home, that person is on the floor.
Right. Not to mention once you start building a tolerance, you start to, that one cocktail that used to relax you enough that you could relax for the evening no longer works. Now it's 1.5, now it's 2, now it's 3, 3.5. And that goes up almost naturally as you put more and more into your body too.
Alcohol is interesting.
It really is, isn't it?
It's a very interesting substance in my fellowship. It's one of the drugs of choice. It doesn't matter how you look at it, it's a minor mood altering substance. So, but the thing that I've seen with alcohol is that the true alcoholic can take a thimble full of alcohol and shoot that down, a thimble, and you will notice that change immediately.
Yeah.
And it's cunning. So,
yeah.
That's one of the problems. And it really, I think it brings us to why we would want, fire departments, unions, civic associations, treatment centers,
Yeah.
to be familiar with who we are, what we do, where and how we do it. It depends on your clientele, the geography. Treatment centers in Montana are not going to be the same as a treatment center in South Florida.
Right.
And they're going to have a different type of person, most probably, with the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have a fair understanding and familiarization with the firefighter. I don't want to call us a product, but that client base.
Yeah.
And how we think and why we think that way.
Well, if you don't understand a little bit of their culture, how are you going to communicate with them? Because there is a culture, like we've been talking about all along. But this course, what we're talking about, it gives you all that information. It gives you information about understanding the stresses and the things that they go through on a daily basis, and their relationships within the department. That is a very tight-knit and close brotherhood. Brotherhood, not to say that it's just men, it's men and women. And with the addition of how, using the intervention portion of the training, how do I approach somebody and talk to them about it? Standing over somebody and pointing your finger at them almost never works. I mean, you've got to learn ways to communicate and learn how to approach and, what to do if they do show any signs of wanting help. I mean, it's really great to walk up and say, Bob, you got a problem? Bob says, yeah, I got a problem. Now, what are you going to do with them if you don't know?
Well, Scott, that's interesting because you just got through half the battle.
Right.
Because
right.
you've just had somebody that admitted they got a problem. That's different than somebody that doesn't admit they got a problem and they do.
Exactly.
And that's the person that can really get propelled up that addiction ladder in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And these people, and I was there, are part of a cohesive working unit that has to be in sync. And if you have somebody that is been affected by any of the aforementioned substances, you have a real possibility of, one, endangering yourselves, and 2, endangering our public.
Yes.
And so this is something that, that we talk about in the course that most even first responders don't think about, never mind treatment centers or, or union organizations. The response that we got out of the Illinois State Peer Association when we did the presentations there, they were stunned at some of the stuff that we pointed out that they never even thought of.
Right.
And, that wasn't the goal. The goal was to get the information out there, and I really appreciated that. But the fact of the matter is that it was things about our culture that we, as firefighters, don't even think about. And I'm sure police officers don't. And that the treatment people, they don't necessarily understand those things. There is local, in different places around the country, clinician awareness training for you to get familiar with the person, what they do, where they do it, why they do it, the equipment. They're given opportunities to work with that. They do some mock-ups so that they understand what kind of situations they've been. But they don't necessarily have the situations that we explain to them when we teach this course.
Right.
Things about, I'm in my 5th decade, and so I've not just seen changes in the people. I mean, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and where are we now with what's going on in the world? Another generation. Yeah. This is my 5th decade, and it's been louder, hotter, if you're a firefighter, crazier, busier, and I got to cover my body from head to toe till you walk out the door. Universal precautions used to be a pair of gloves.
Right. Yeah.
Now it's full-on bunker gear and SCBA pretty much. I mean, you got a mask, you got a glove, you got to disinfect.
As if you needed one more thing to worry about when you go out.
Well, we've got it.
You're already worried about all the situations that you could be going into in a fire situation or a rescue situation or an emergency. Now you've got to put on top of that just being in contact with people as a problem. That is a crazy amount of pressure, Joel.
Well, we have a new pressure, and that's domestic terrorism. And we are being trained in that. And that is, firefighters getting shot at. We didn't have to worry about that back in the day. We were there to help.
Yeah.
We didn't have handcuffs and guns. We had Band-Aids and life packs.
Yeah.
And now we have to worry about every event that we're dispatched to. Is it safe?
And with every one of these stressors that we're adding into our daily lives, whether you're a first responder or not, firefighter or not, every one of these pressures just adds to that, to the possibility of having some sort of problem where you develop maybe it starts as a simple crutch and it becomes a full-blown issue. You made a good statement a few minutes ago when you were talking about when somebody has a problem and they go on a job, they put everybody at risk. That doesn't mean they have to be drunk or high to put people at risk.
Not necessarily, no.
Right, because if they're not using or drinking, but they do have a problem, they're still, even if they're not using or drinking at the moment, they're not fully there for you, are they? They could be suffering some mental issues.
Well, the number one mental issue for the addict or alcoholic is, when am I going to get my next use?
And how much of your time does that take?
It's a
total distraction.
Anybody out there that understands this, and even those that don't, that first and foremost in the prefrontal cortex is saying to your brain, the rest of it, while I'm putting this life pack on, or while I'm taking this blood pressure, let's see, I'll be home at 8 o'clock in the morning and I can do this. And it's distracting.
Yeah.
It is. And if you're in the advanced stages, it could be, when do I get back to the station? Because,
yeah.
I know most fire departments and administrations say they don't want to hear it. But the fact of the matter is, if I did it, it's happening. If I've intervened on folks in fire stations at 2 or 3 in the morning because they've been caught with substances or alcohol, frequent trips to the truck, to their own personal vehicle.
Yeah.
you've got to be aware of who, what, how, and why, and when it's time to stop that. And that's what we're about. That's what we're trying to do here. You know, to number one, explain to administrators that we have these people and it's okay as long as we know how to deal with them. It's never going to stop. With COVID, it's probably gotten worse. But when we have somebody like that, here's how we have to approach it. We have behaviors. We have discipline. We have absenteeism records. We have, tardiness records. We have the face-to-face contact, the appearance, the withdrawal, from activity, the isolation in the station, the spending a lot of time alone in the bunk room, the decline in the performance of their duties. This is all very visible.
Right.
And so it's really the shift officer that's responsible to make sure everybody is okay, but it's your own and your coworkers' responsibility to watch out for each other.
And is that, can we bring that around now to why it's so important to have people trained within the department itself instead of just having an outsider come in all the time and check people out? I mean, you need somebody that you trust who's trained, right? I mean, it's an advantage. You don't have to have it, but it would be an advantage to have somebody within your department who is part of that culture to have this training.
It would be advantageous to everybody, for everybody to have the training.
Agreed.
You don't have to walk around looking for addicts and alcoholics. That's not the reason for it.
No.
We're all good people. We're all there trying to help. We're all still doing the job. We just got problems. We need to recognize when that problem is occurring. That's all. The culture, which is changing a little bit, has to show support for the people that are really interested voluntarily in getting help, as well as somebody that you might intervene on. So if you have a disciplinary problem and you have all these other things going on, within the station, you can work on that and find one of us, or hopefully one of us is there, to be able to say, we all love you, you're part of our team, but we know this is occurring. We know it. This isn't about whether you can, can't, will, won't. You're going to hurt somebody. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to expose us to a huge liability, and we want you to get help, and we've prepared that for you. And guess what? You're still going to get paid. You have FMLA protection. You can't get fired. You've got insurance. We've got you approved already. We have a place that will take care of all of your needs, give you access to communications when you need it, so that there's nothing going on outside. And you have a representative here that is part of your family that loves you and will take care of the stuff at home.
I just, I thought, just how cool would it be to have a whole department trained, everyone trained in the department. I mean, imagine it would keep that secret from arising. It would be much harder for somebody to come in there and make these things happen, or to have these things happen. Problems could be recognized before they become major problems. And that is really important. You don't have to wait until it's a life or death to help somebody. Is that true?
Not only is that true, how about the person that now has to sit and take that class that is encountering a problem on his own?
That would be interesting to see how that...
Well, I can tell you how it is because I did it.
Okay.
I'm going to the Addictions Academy as an addict. And
I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny.
But it's true.
Right.
I'm in pain management. I'm addicted to pain meds. I'm going to an Addictions Academy. I'm learning about myself. And finally, the guilt was so great that I had to stop. And so I just went home one day to my wife and said, I need an absolute consequence. Just tell me you'll leave if I don't get off this shit. And she said, okay, you got an absolute consequence. If you don't get off this, I'm leaving. I'm like, done. And that took a couple of weeks, but I did what I had to do. And today I'm happy, joyous, and free in recovery as well. And I can tell you, I don't need the old friends anymore. I got new ones. In fact, now with COVID and Zoom, I have friends all over the friggin' world that are celebrating life. That aren't isolated, because we are a brotherhood, a fellowship. And there's a sub-fellowship of firefighters that are in recovery that now know and talk to each other and carry the message to others. And we did that. We did that here. We trained firefighters, and they're out there doing what I did, relentlessly carrying the message. And it's a wonderful feeling to see somebody that I intervened on 5 or 10 years ago calling me and saying, we got one on the way. I love you, man. That's great.
Just think about it for a moment, people, that if you have this kind of training in your department, the problems that can be averted and the people that can be helped, not only within the department, but within their own families and in their social circles. Addiction doesn't stop because you're a fireman. It could go into your house, into your wife or husband, your kids, and to have some sort of understanding of that. That's really important, right?
Listen, my intervention and my consulting and my placement of people in treatment just starts at the firefighter.
Right.
The family I've probably worked on more family members as clients than I have actual line firefighters and retirees. And I do that the same way I do what I've been doing for years. It'll remind you that I don't charge anybody anything when I do this. Do you think that a frontline firefighter, father or mother, is going to be 100% up here performing their job with an active sibling or an active child on the street?
Exactly.
It's not happening. And we've all been affected by it. We know what it is. And so that's the reason why I do it. We want our people 100%.
I think it's incredible that you do it. First of all, because they deserve it. Without the family support, whether it's the mom or the dad or the husband or the wife going off to work and do this job, without the support of the people at home, they wouldn't do this job. So they're just as important to the department as the person who's climbing the ladder or driving the truck is their support system at home. So they need to be helped as well. You're right. If they're not healthy, you're not going to have somebody who's fully aware and be able to focus. I know for a fact, going through it with an addicted child myself, that I could go into a funk for days and I still show up, but I'm not all there.
No.
And luckily I'm not put in a position where it's a life or death with somebody physically in front of me that I have to help, but you are. So I think it's really important about that to remember those families are so important to the fire service, aren't they?
They are the fire service.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop with the guy that's going to work. It goes home to the wife or the husband that is sending that person off that day, or is receiving them when they come home, or is partially responsible for the environment at home and making sure things are okay.
Yeah.
A lot of times we have reports of an individual who really needs to be looked at, and one of the things that we do is first and foremost is we explore what, how, and why this person has made this call. And we want to know, is it a coworker? Do we want to know, is it a family member?
Yeah.
Who knows what and where, and then how far does it get? And when you get a family member calling, they're probably going to be able to supply you with a coworker that has been exposed to this problem with that specific person. And so that's the next step. You get that information there. Eventually, you're going to wind up right in the fire station right next to that person that is being spoke about. And you're going to have every bit of information you need to intervene in that behavior and get them some help. Because there's no way out. The only way out is just to say no. Now, you've got lots of people around them that are saying, we know. You got to get better. We don't want you here like this. The pressure is tremendous once it gets into the station. Family pressure is great, and it's certainly a big help, and sometimes it's all you have. Because nobody, I'm working on one now actually, nobody at work has any clue what's going on. But I have a blackout drunk who's driving drunk, drinking before he goes to work.
Wow.
And so you have to be very careful about who, how, and why. When you have the leverage of the crew, when there's a potential of something happening with that job, as a first responder, as a firefighter especially, that's when it becomes, I'll do whatever it takes to keep my job.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter if their job's not in jeopardy. They in that addict or alcoholic mind, they think I'm going to get in a lot of trouble here. And that's okay if it helps them get to treatment.
I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but I would imagine if somebody who goes into fire service, it's not just like taking a job at the Winn-Dixie or changing oil at Napa. I mean, this is, you want that life. You want to be, I don't want to use the word to be a hero, but you want to help. You want to be the person that people turn to. So it's much deeper than just a job. It's not like you could lose a job.
It's deeper than that.
Yes.
It's deeper than that because there's something that inspired you to want to do that.
Exactly.
Whether you saw a cartoon as a 6-year-old, whether you were watching Emergency as a child, when we...
I used to love that show.
Right. and so whether you saw Backdraft in 1985 as a 12-year-old,
right,
and you were inspired to do this, and that's what you did, or your dad was a fireman, and all you ever wanted to do was hang around the fire station.
Yeah.
So there's all different kinds of reasons, there's all different kinds of mindsets, but there's emotion attached to being a firefighter.
Yeah.
And so they don't want any risk of that job. Yeah. And we're here to make you understand that the only thing at risk here is you. We're not putting your job at risk. When we enter into an intervention, and we know it's going to be an intervention, we already have you cleared and ready to go. All you got to do is say yes.
Yeah.
Your stuff will wind up in the car with you. Your exception to the treatment center is already done.
But having this leverage, Joel, the leverage of, this is part of your identity, this job. This is really important to you, and we want to preserve that, and you need some help. It's great to have that leverage, but if somebody's not recognizing the problem and stepping up and saying something or doing something, then all that doesn't matter.
That's correct.
It doesn't matter, and that's what we're talking about, is having enough people trained so that there's eyes everywhere. And if there is a problem, let's recognize it and do something about it. You can't just ignore it. Joel, how many times I know you've come across it, I have, where somebody says, I'll take care of it later, and then we never hear from them again because they're dead. It happens.
We hear more stuff than that.
Yeah, I know.
It's no, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. I do it when I feel like doing it, and I can stop anytime I want.
And then?
Right.
Disaster.
Exactly. Let me give you a scenario, just so that you have this on for the record. I have been in several situations where somebody has had a reasonable suspicion test at work, and they've tested positive for, well, in this case, let's say alcohol. We have a 24, 48 shift situation, all over the country. In some places, like down here, we get a Kelly Day, which is every 7th shift you don't work at all, so you have 5 days in a row. What would be the reason that you test positive for alcohol at work when in 24 hours there's nothing there? you have a problem.
Yeah.
If you don't have an addiction to alcohol, you have a brain that's saying it's okay to do this and go to work. You know, I can drink all night, I'll be fine in a couple of hours, and I'll go. And then you test positive. And, you know, they're sent to EAP. And EAP, by the time they get them, it's days later. And
Yeah.
everything's fine. You know, I just made a bad decision, blah, blah, blah. Okay, see me for a couple of days, and I'll put you on light duty, and then I'll put you back to work. And so that's what happens. And while that person's on light duty or is absent because the counselor wants to see him, he wrecks a car. He wrecks 7 cars. He's got a 3-county chase. He is now facing prison time, and he's in a treatment center mandatorily. And somebody gives me a call. This is a true story. And I go to the station where that employee worked, because it's no secret anymore. The whole department knows what's going on. And I ask the people there what it is that they witnessed as behavior and performance and other habits in the fire station. And the stuff that poured out of them, absolutely, I was flustered, befuddled. I don't know what kind of words I can use without cursing.
Yeah.
But I was pissed
Right.
that these people knew all these things and said he was ready to explode months ago, and nobody did anything about it.
Joel, you and I could probably talk for hours and have story after story about this. You know, bottom line, we're gonna wrap up the show, but trust me, we're gonna do more of these shows with Joel and I. Talking about firefighters and things that are going on. We'll highlight some treatment options and things certainly in the future. Right now, what we're trying to do is really get people to understand that this is important. This is the jaws of life for addiction right now. We're talking about people being trained and people understanding the seriousness of the problem and being able to address it is going to save lives. It's going to save departments' reputations. I know we don't want to talk too much about that, but when you start having problems with addictions and people getting in trouble at a department, the whole department suffers a black eye from that as well. You want to be good to your community and good to your people. They're your employees, they're your friends, they're your brothers and sisters. Give them the tools they need to deal with these kind of issues, addiction, even mental health. It's all really important. Joel, would you agree with that? I mean, they need this.
I can't. I have no other way. Your words are dead on. And by the way, the Jaws of Life is a great name for a treatment program.
It really would be. Wouldn't it? Yeah, don't steal that. We're going to save that for art. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, but it's I think we've talked about it before. You got a department with say 40 or 50 people within that department, and you don't train one person to use one piece of apparatus. You train as many people as possible. That way, there's always somebody there who can assist or do what needs to be done. Same thing with this kind of stuff. If you train enough people, there's always somebody there who can recognize these problems. And we won't have to tell these stories anymore where somebody ends up in a hospital or dead or in jail or something worse. We won't have to hear the stories about how everybody knew something was wrong but nobody did anything.
That's the story.
We can't have that anymore. That's not acceptable. We are our brother's keeper. We are responsible for each other, at least to lend a hand and to help. Not everybody's going to accept help. I mean, let's be honest. We're not talking about saving lives and it's always going to work. There's people who are going to say, I'm going to keep doing it, and they're going to have to go off and do what they got to do. But some people are just waiting for someone to put out a hand and help them. Be that person.
It's the bottom that gets there. If they're close enough to the bottom,
Yeah.
and you are good and educated in what you do the way we do it, they're going to go. They're they're close to sick and tired. They've been sick and tired before, and eventually they're going to be sick and tired, or they're going to be gone, or something worse. If you get them at that point, which is the point in which you listen, remember, we're firefighters. We're really good at one thing: hiding it. And so if we start to notice at work signs and symptoms that we're teaching you about, and as paramedics you already know about, but there are some subtle things that you need to understand. This is an advanced stage of the problem. This isn't the normal Joe on the street. This is somebody who is trained in this, who has been manipulating his brain schedule for a long period of time, long enough to be able to unable to hide the symptoms at work.
Absolutely. Joel, thanks for your time, brother. I appreciate you coming over here, taking some time away. I know with COVID and everything, what hasn't suffered is your chance to go fishing as much as you can. So I hope you can get some in.
Hey, listen.
That's a good solo operation right there, isn't it?
Yes, it's great. It's mental masturbation.
Catch the fish.
If you're with a department, an agency, even if you're not, you're a firefighter and you're having problems, there's numbers that are on our site and probably somewhere on this video you can call and ask about help. You can be anonymous. We've got treatment centers that specialize in our population. We have a great knowledge of the insurance industry and how it works. And these folks are ready, willing, and able to work with us, and we'll get you there if you're having a problem deciding or taking that step to get the help. You can get well and stay well and not have any kind of mark on your employment record in any way, shape, or form, except maybe an attaboy from somebody for getting it right. So with that, thank you for watching us.
Thanks for joining us. And, as you've seen throughout the show, the website and phone number has been scrolling across the bottom of the screen. So make sure you guys check that out. If you have any problems, questions, and maybe just some comments about what we've talked about, certainly reach out to us. We're always willing to help out any way we can and to spread the word that education is power, knowledge is power. Ignorance gets you nowhere. You cannot bury your head in the sand anymore, people. Let's all help each other. Joel, once again, thank you very much. You've been listening to Spotlight on Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Scott Jones. We'll catch you next time.